Hello and welcome to Japan Business Insights. What's the socio-economic impact of the population reduction in Japan? Today, we're talking with Eric Fraser about the opportunities and challenges that come with the demographic changes in the population.
What I'm happy to do is to present just some very, very key numbers. If you do the amount of reading that I've done on this subject, you will come across so many numbers. But here are some key ones that express the magnitude of the challenge ahead of Japan. So Japan's population today is 126.3 million people. The projection for 2040, less than 20 years away, is 107 million people, which is a 15.3% decline. And the projection for 2050 is 97 million people, which is a 23.2% decline from today. The replacement birth rate for any population is 2.1. Japan's birth rate in 1947 was 4.5. Japan's birth rate in 2019 is 1.36. There is a target birth rate set by the government of 1.8 to be reached by 2025, but obviously that's still under the replacement birth rate. And the percentage of people above 65, in 2019 it was 28%, in 2040 it's projected to be 36%, in 2050 it's projected to be 39%. And then this is the most dramatic set of numbers. This is how many years it took for the population of 65 and older to double from 7% to 14% of the total population. So in France, it took 126 years the population of over 65s to double from 7% to 14%. In Sweden, that same change took 85 years. In Germany, that change took 40 years. In Japan, it took 24 years. So it's not just a reduction of the population, but it's also a reshaping of the demographic makeup of the population. Everyone, I think, is really familiar with this. The basic summary of what the economic impact is that the economic output or the obligation or the duty to provide the economic output will fall on a smaller number or a smaller percentage, or both really, of the population. Younger people will have to produce more in order to maintain the standard of living that exists today, because there'll be more older people to support. Some of those people will be out of the workforce and they will need caring for. And there's lots and lots and lots of numbers that express that problem. And what I'm, I guess, more interested in for this conversation is the social impact of the shrinkage of the population and the demographic change in the population. So I can offer insights and observations from the reading I've done, but I'd be very interested to share intuition and insights from people who live in Japan now, from people who have lived in Japan before and who have taken an interest in this subject. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Eric. Those are like really interesting numbers. And of course, we're dealing with averages. So to paint a little nuance to this, as somebody, I live in Tatami, right? So it's considered the countryside. So the distribution of elderly and young people is dramatically different in a city like Tokyo or Osaka compared to where I live. And I don't know, maybe Stephen knows this statistic, but as somebody who lives in Atami, I feel like the elderly population is much more than 50% here. But I might be wrong. It's all more intuitive what I see around me. So each individual area across Japan has a different magnitude of a problem because of the distribution of the elderly. Does that make any sense?
It does make a lot of sense. There's also actually differences in the birth rates from one prefecture to another as well.
Yeah.
So Okinawa, for example, has the national average is 1.36, but Okinawa has a birth rate of 1.82 right now.
Yeah.
So that's the highest birth rate of the prefectures.
Yeah, so, I don't know. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Maya, you were going to say something?
No, I was going to just to talk about the area which I live in Tokyo. So it's really same exactly as you said, because I live in Itabashiku, and when we moved here, before we moved here, actually we lived in that was Nakanoku, And then when our daughter was born, and we were just, looking for, well, a place where she could, a daycare center for her to go, it was really impossible to get into one because there were a lot of young people there, young families. And then we moved to this place now, it is Itabashiku, and immediately we found a place for her. And I think that, well, basically this place here, when we moved in, there were a lot of senior people living here. And I think also that it allowed, a lot of new families to move in, and actually, especially families where the two parents are working, to move here and actually, use the facilities for kids. And I think that it also shows that there is this dynamics within Tokyo. I guess in other places of Japan it's the same, or probably similar, if not the same. But there is this dynamics that, the wards, the cities within Tokyo, they will eventually start competing, for younger families. So
Interesting.
it is, yeah, I somehow just feel that this is going to be an ever-growing trend because, if you don't have young families actually who live there or in your area, it's really difficult to get the budgets which are necessary. I mean, via tax, the budgets which are necessary to maintain the infrastructure and well, other systems which are useful and which are well, which are good for the people who live there. I don't know whether well, how it sounds, but just Eric.
Yeah, that's a really interesting aspect that I hadn't thought of before. The competition among different areas of Japan, not just among the 23 wards, but among prefectures and urban centres for this quote unquote desirable demographic in Japanese society. And that could end up with really interesting, good and dysfunctional effects. I'm thinking of, things that you see in China about the competitiveness there when it comes to, for example, guys who are trying to get married, essentially. There's so many, there's an oversupply of guys, essentially, of marrying age. And so there's this almost cutthroat competition between them. They do things like they take out billboards to advertise themselves about how, what good prospects they are for marriage. And there's going to be, I guess, maybe a reverse competition in Japan for people of a certain demographic. They're a tax-paying base, they're younger, they're growing families, whatever it is that makes them attractive. Maybe you'll see a kind of very, very vigorous competition among the areas of Japan. The other big one that I thought might be worth talking about is there is an idea that in order to preserve living standards and maybe even to preserve just gross GDP, there might be this need to, quote unquote, import people into Japan. In other words, to have net migration, which means more non-Japanese people living in Japan. And I think there has always been a fear or a suspicion that this will just make Japanese society go away or disappear, which I don't think anyone wants. And I also feel that the people who are likely to immigrate to Japan are probably like me, and they love Japanese society and would fight to preserve it, if anything. Yeah.
Very interesting perspective. And then this demographic is, to me, it's one of the most interesting things. I have been away from Japan for a little over 20 years. I'm Japanese, originally from Japan, but living in the United States for 21 years. And looking at Japan from outside, and I hear a lot of discussions, very similar, cities are competing those young families in order to generate tax revenue or not. And this immigration, also I hear the discussion. And then I often hear this type of, doom and gloom scenarios for the shrinking population. At the same time, I think there are some business opportunities I see. One thing I see is a young, I should say young, old people who feel they're still young. They are healthy, they still behave like young adults. And I have a friend who is in late 60s. He still goes to gym every day, the Zumba, volunteers. He has a lot of time, a lot of money. So there's a new target segment of market who are healthy. And for female, this is a new market as well. There are fashion magazines for people in 50s, which we didn't have before. And then now I think I saw a magazine for females who are in their 60s. Fashion magazines, you know, people still want to keep up beauty, right? People still want to, when you look at the YouTube, there are people, women in 60s, showing how to put on makeup and look young. So there's a new market. And at the same time, you know, like you said, number is a power. Older people are still decision makers. So I feel as a society, younger people are feeling like they don't have decision-making power. Therefore, they are not participating to politics, not that much. That's my observation outside, you know, sitting the other side of the Pacific Ocean.
Well, that's very hopeful. The basically the presence and the influence of older, if I can even call them, I mean, I'm in my 50s myself, right? I don't consider myself very old. But the active presence of an older generation in Japan, you know, 60s, even 70s. I know 70-year-olds in Japan who are also similarly active, definitely part of the economy, still contributing to the economy. So the fear about an overall shrinkage of a population meaning an overall shrinkage of GDP, it may not be as bad as some economists have painted it to be, because people are staying active as consumers and workers for longer. But I think that the acuteness of the population drop is great enough for there to be probably an overall contraction of GDP. That in itself is not the biggest disaster in the world, by the way. If it can be, you know, offset partially by a rise in productivity, which I think is perfectly believable and doable in Japan, then you could still have a smaller number and a smaller proportion of people producing enough, and I say producing in quotation marks there, but doing enough in the economy to preserve a familiar Japanese standard of living without having to make people work until they're 90.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I'll let you talk in a second, Ulrike. I was just going to say, you know, 15 years ago, the Dankai no Sedai, which is the Japanese baby boomers, was targeted in Hawaii. I lived in Hawaii at the time, as the most lucrative market because they had the most savings, right? And this was 15 years ago. So I think that's one. You know, the younger people do not have the resources or the savings that the older market has. So I still think it's a ticking clock. You know, there's going to be, eventually they're going to die. They're healthy now. So I think that's one concern. And then the other concern is, just maybe we can come back to later, is I predicted like 20 years ago that the demographics would give Japanese women more opportunities. And so far I've proven wrong. But I feel like, you know, the idea of importing people skips over the fact that they have 50% of the population highly educated who speaks perfect Japanese, that, you know, they would be like not considering them as candidates, which to me should be part of their strategy. Okay, I'll let Ulrike talk. I just wanted to throw that up.
Well, thank you. Let me just add, say on that. So what's interesting in the data is that the working population of Japan is not shrinking. And that is because the women are entering the working force, the workforce in numbers that are unprecedented. So that's actually happening in a way, Tim. But that doesn't change Eric's overall data. I wanted to add something on this productivity and GDP and standard of living. And that is, I'm actually working on a monograph right now that looks at what I call Japan's lucky moment. And the lucky moment is that because Japan is the first country to go through this aging, shrinking demographic change, for Japan, this onset of labor shortage and shrinking society is happening at the exact same time as the digital transformation. And so both of these developments are often seen as negatives, right? So shrinking population is bad. And of course, the digital transformation is, replacing jobs with machines and changing the way we do work and so forth and so on. But for Japan, these two negatives could actually come together as a positive in that it allows society to embrace robots in a very different way, in that the replacement of men by machine is much less threatening in Japan than it might be, for instance, in the United States.
Yeah.
And that, so that this actually creates a. Let me give you an example. The Japan has, as many of you know, multiple layers of wholesalers, where a box with 6 bottles of beer go from the beer maker through like 10 layers of wholesalers with increasingly smaller trucks that then deliver the box to some small little retail shop somewhere. It's highly inefficient. That will probably be replaced. Not only is already being replaced by convenience stores, but also by blockchain logistics and whatnot. And it doesn't matter because these wholesalers are on average 75 years old and they don't have successors. So the digital transformation will wipe out parts of the economy that are not particularly productive as it is, and nobody is damaged by this change. Eric, what do you think?
Well, firstly, I'm glad that you brought that up, because that is actually one of my favorite subjects to talk about too, is the integration of technology into previously only human things. But first of all, I can't wait to read that paper. It does sound like it's a really lucky break, as you say, or a lucky moment. And one thing that I really key in on there is how if you're an American and you're listening to this and you live in America, you live in a country that has a subconscious nightmare about robots taking over and killing us. And that nightmare does not seem to exist in Japan. So there is not the fear, the visceral fear of robotics and technology that exists in America. And I think that will allow Japan to be more accepting of things like, if you don't have enough doctors to get around to all of the remote rural areas in Japan, maybe you can station a robot in one of those rural areas, and that robot can serve as a kind of mechanical avatar for a doctor who televisits patients, and maybe some of the care can be delivered like that. So there's less social barrier, or there's a less strong social barrier and psychological barrier in Japan, I think, towards the use of robotics and the incorporation of robotics into fields that were not previously thought of as human-only fields. And there is already a plan, a very publicized plan, that part of the way that Japan gets through this challenge of losing a lot of its labor force and losing some of its knowledge is to essentially robot its way through. So rather than, for every Japanese that leaves the workforce, we've got to find, a Filipino or an Indonesian or a Thai person to come in and replace them. Some of these can just be replaced by robotics and automation. And as Ulrike said, there are some layers in the Japanese economy that, frankly, just to be competitive, they might want to consider automating them anyway.
I have the great good fortune of working at the National Museum of Emerging Science and Innovation, commonly referred to as Meet Icon. And I've been there ever since we've opened. And one of our employees, and there was a great celebration when this was done, is the Honda robot Azimol. And that just that idea of giving a robot an employee number and paying him with electricity is indication of how much robots are part of Japanese society. We also have had Aibo, which the first version, first generation of Aibo, which could actually learn. And it was one of close to artificial intelligence. Since then, we also have an android that was developed to pose the question, what's the difference between humans and robots, and what are the similarities? And will we ever get to the point where they'll be very, very, very similar and very few differences? So just from the experience of MeetIcon, that supports both Urica, and I hope I'm pronouncing that name right, and Eric.
Yes, you did. Thank you. Yes, and also on that point, there's a interesting study by a Japanese economist who looked at basically the combination of these AI advances and immigration, which, by the way, is happening, right? And immigration. So as a combination of the two, the productivity may actually not go down, rather go up, as some of the unproductive sectors are phased out, and Japan introduces a sort of a new normal where basically already the convenience store staff is students and immigrants, and in the future those staff will basically just guide you to a machine to do whatever needs to be accomplished in the transaction, right? So and then the convenience stores in the long run will not have any staff anymore at all. And so the technology advances actually will help. And what they wipe out are the low productivity jobs and the mom and pop stores and so forth. And so I think even for the macro economy, as much as I'm not sure that economic growth is all that matters, it's more about sustainable prosperity. But overall, I think these are actually trends that could work out pretty well.
Thank you, Ulrika and Gary. I want to share a little story that supports what both of you are saying about that. And so when I was in Japan, one of the things that I was there to do was help a company sell a solution that basically lived on a mobile device and helped field service engineers do everything remotely instead of carrying around, a lot of paper. And so I showed some field engineering managers from a large Japanese manufacturer what this app did, and they were very happy with it, and they said they'd like to start using it. And then one of them said, if I connect a printer to my iPad, can I also print out the work orders? And yes, of course, the answer is yes, but the whole point of the app was to stop you from having to do that. But obviously, he needed to feed a process that needed paper somewhere in his company. So I shared this story with some younger Japanese, workers over drinks from that company. When I say younger, I mean they were, younger than 30. They were sort of recently graduated and in the first 5 years of their careers, and they thought it was hilarious and said that, when their generation was in charge, they would change the processes so that sort of question never came up. So I thought that was super, super interesting how it wasn't just, at first I thought, well, the Japanese paper is a sort of almost a sacred thing in Japan, and maybe they just really want the paper. Maybe it just makes it more meaningful for them. And the Japanese workers are like, no, it's not that. It's just pure inefficiency. We're going to get rid of that when we're in charge. And that was very interesting to me. And that, if that dynamic holds, if that is really an example of a bigger dynamic, then yeah, I think that the potential for automating away inefficiencies might be massive.
To Eric's point, when I am in clubhouse in Japanese rooms and talking to younger generation, I can see the mindset change to from generation to generation. Right? They talk about the kind of stubbornness of older generation, but the younger generation, they are like a different species. They have different mindset for the gender issues, the social issues. So I think the technology is going to be advanced and utilized a lot more for among younger generation. And I'm glad, Timothy, you mentioned about this female advancement in to the management position of the Japanese corporation. I think it will change. And yes, it has been very disappointing to see the lack of progress in the female management. You know, gender gap still, Japan is about 120th in the gender gap. But I am seeing changes even for the larger organization. For example, you guys may know this system, you know, Ippan Shoku and Sogo Shoku, right? Ippan Shoku is basically the clerical path, and then Sogo Shoku is a management path. In the past, there was hardly any Sogo Shoku females, but today I'm hearing one Shosha, major Japanese trading company, their percentage of Sogo Shoku female is the same as male. They hired 30 female and then 30, what do you call it, the Kanbu Kohose, the management kind of leadership candidate people. So the number was very encouraging. And Japanese companies, they don't have a choice but to utilize female labor force because population is not there. So I think Japanese companies are realizing they have no choice but to utilize those, you know, talented female. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just thought it was going to happen sooner, you know, but I agree. It's kind of an evolution just by necessity. So for sure. Yeah, that's good.
So it may truly be a remarkably lucky moment in Japanese economic history where there is this great need, but then the need happens to be met by a highly educated, you know, workforce of women who are ready and willing to do it, and the availability and development of new technology that can fill in some gaps that people might have left.
Well, yeah, so basically that's the point we're making in this monograph that I'm happy to give you a preview of. But the argument is actually quite difficult to make in a research setting, right? Because is that really is what's coming new really better than what's going out? And you talked about that at the beginning, and I listened very carefully because if only for sentimental reasons. I mean, we may not like all of these changes, right? And what can be done that this, if it really is a sort of a taking over the baton, kind of this handshake, you know, the old people out, machines in, what can be done that society does not lose its, let's just say, or its cohesion?
Right. Yeah, there's a couple of angles to that I would like to offer the group. One angle is, you know, by my observation, at least the professionals, I admit I did not talk to a lot of agricultural workers who had immigrated to Japan to do agricultural work, but I did speak to professionals who had come to Japan, you know, engineers usually, and they were similarly in love with Japanese culture. I think that's what drew them to Japan in the first place. Like me, I put my hand up to come to Japan because I loved Japanese culture. And I think they did too. And so if you are importing, if they're the sort of people coming to Japan, they're likely to want to protect Japanese culture, not to erode it. And then it made me think, well, what do I love about Japanese culture? Why do I love this culture so much? And to me, it's a lot more than, you know, geishas and anime. I mean, there's some really fundamental and essential values that I think are just so healthy and really worth preserving. Just one, for example, is the trust that people have for strangers, essentially. You know, people will leave valuables on a Shinkansen and wander off to talk to their friends without knowing anything about the person that they've just left their, you know, $3,000 handbag next to. This happened to me, which is why it kind of sticks in my mind. And I would really not like to see those values get eroded. And I think that the professionals I talked to also noticed this. They made note of it. They thought, wow, I wish that existed where I came from. And, you know, if I can, I'm going to do my part to preserve this. Then the other angle I wanted to offer to you is that the introduction of technology. Now, in America, there is this this belief that as we introduce more technology, we are actually eroding some part of essential American culture. I'm not sure that that is true in Japan. I think that there is this belief and this confidence that we can meld technology into society without eroding Japanese culture. In some ways, I think that's expressed in, you know, popular entertainment as well. I should let someone else comment at this point, but I have a particular example from the world of film.
I think speaking to both those points, there's a key element to Japanese society, which is inclusiveness. And it struck me when I started working for Keio Girls High School as well as the elementary school. And I'm very much into education. My background is educational psychology. And I was stunned at the girls' high school with how they had 3 major events in the school year. So there was a sports festival, there was a drama festival, and the school festival. And I was stunned with how these kids would come in at 7 a.m. in the morning and work on the projects that they had for each one of these festivals, and then they'd work after school as well. And the kids were so tired, it was difficult to get them to do some of the homework, to participate in class simply because they were so tired. And I thought, this is crazy. This is supposed to be all about scholastics and learning, and why should they be putting so much time and effort into these non-scholastic events? And every one of the girls in the high school were involved, and everyone was included in this. And then when I started working at the elementary school, every one of the kids had to participate in some activity immediately after school. It could be the judo club or gymnastics or kendo or flower arrangement or golf. Every kid had to be included. And I realized this is very deeply part of the culture in which people are included. And that inclusiveness then leads to more respect for other people and responsibility, self-responsibility about how you're going to contribute to the society. And it makes for a cohesive society. So I think that that is reflected in trust for strangers, as Eric was saying. And I do believe that even though Japan is a technologically advanced country, the culture will continue because that's so ingrained in the culture.
Thanks, Gary. Tim, I'm reading your name, but I know you as Tim. Sounded like you wanted to say something there.
I was just going to make the point that Japan has a very, very long history of importing ideas, whether it's technology or whether, Prince Shotoku in the 7th century got aggressive in bringing in Buddhism, Confucianism, and the writing system. And so Japan has a very long history of being able to take concepts, Japanize them, and have change and also stability and tradition. So it's not something new. They've done this before. They did it in the Meiji Restoration, learning from, catching up with and surpassing the West. So it doesn't really surprise me that I think they feel comfortable and confident in incorporating technology and preserving their culture. Although it's interesting because Maya and I had Christian Bocher on, and he was talking about that there's still resistance at certain levels to stop using the fax machine in the medical industry. So it was kind of heartening to hear that the younger generation can't wait to overturn, the cultural inertia of resisting some of that.
Thanks, Tim. And thanks, Gary, for, I think you put it more succinctly and better than I did. Basically, I think what I was trying to say is that there's a cultural civic cohesion here that I think is really enviable. And yeah, I think it does start in the early education sort of arc of the children, and that civic cohesion gives everyone a framework that they can hold on to, and there's a sense that you're not alone as an individual in society. And technology does not have to dehumanize humans, which again, I think there is a fear of that in America. But in Japan, there seems to be this understanding that you can use technology, you can even fuse technology into yourself, and you are still human. And therefore you can still have a culture.
Yes, I think that that's a very valid point. And also, well, as many people who live here long term, I mean, foreigners who live in Japan, everybody has observed that actually the fear here is different. It's not from technology, because humans can control technology. They can create it and, you know, shape it the way they like and use it the way they like. It's the fear is there is another kind of fear, which is, you know, about people coming from other cultures, more or less, because you know, and this is not something bad. I mean, it just happens that the Japanese culture, the Japanese society is indeed inclusive, but at the same time, you know, there is that fear of the unknown, because humans are humans, and you don't know how people will react in certain situations if they are not conditioned to do, you know, that in specific ways, right? And then in the Japanese society, as you said, where everybody has his or her specific role and position, so it's kind of easier to, you know, to be part of the society when the frames are there, and you can move and act within those frames. But when you have people who don't know how the society works here and why they come, and they, you know, just well come with their own expectations and biases, then it creates a kind of stress. And I think that's where the fear lies. It's, as you said, Eric, it's not so much about technology. It's more about people who come from other cultural backgrounds.
Right. And I think that you really hit on something there about it throws into question what your role is. So there's a lot of comfort, I think, in Japan drawn from being assigned a role. And as long as you do that role, you're okay. You will be looked after as long as you do your role. And the thing with immigration is you can turn it on and off. The government is allowed to say no immigration, lots of immigration, somewhere in between. That's something you can control. But you have a lot less control over aging and death so far. So people are going to die whether you want them to anyway. And in Japan, that dynamic is going to cause such a fast population drop-off that there may be this kind of mass psychological reset where people say, okay, we've got to forget about the old roles because we don't have enough people to assign to the roles anyway. Now we've got to make up a completely new system. And I know that it doesn't happen overnight, but the short number of years in which it will happen to Japan may force some kind of great reckoning where people are forced to give up their comfort in the old roles and just say, okay, now we've just got to pragmatically adapt to new roles. Maybe we have to use technology a lot more, but we have a completely different context now. And it might say to them, it's okay to leave behind some of the traditions of the old roles. We can still preserve the best parts of our culture, but now we have a completely new system and a new set of expectations about what men of a certain age are supposed to do, what women of a certain age are supposed to do, when you're supposed to do it. All of those standards might have to be re-engineered socially.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point about the role. And that's one of the reasons that the Japanese society, there are certain kind of, you know, heavy air. I'm not sure how to describe that in English, but people need to follow these unwritten rules that you're supposed to know, and people need to follow that. But I think that mode is gradually changing and breaking. For example, when I was in Japan, 20 years ago, you would not see male salarymen carrying babies and then, riding a train to take the baby to the hoikuen. But today I see young fathers in, business suits carrying babies or the pushing stroller. I thought that was a big change. And then, certain age, I don't think people can afford to continue this role playing in a society anymore because, due to this lack of population, we need people to do certain things. So it doesn't matter how old they are, and then regardless of gender, they need to start playing that role. And one thing about the immigration, in the Japanese clubhouse rooms, we often talk about it and this decline of population. And one of the solutions, of course, bring more immigrants. Then somebody said, but is Japan country of choice for immigrants? There was one business person, his job is to arrange, the students to the other countries. And he told us that Japan is at the bottom of the list of the choice of a country. People want to go to, Europe or United States, they can earn more. And, Japan is known as a low-wage country. So those immigrants, they don't choose Japan for immigration, and then they'd rather go to, Germany or Canada or United States or Australia. And that's what I heard.
I'm sorry, but I think that completely is an opposite of what I'm hearing. That
interesting. Okay.
If you do it globally, maybe Americans would rather go to Europe than they would go to Japan. But if you look within Asia, Japan is the aspiration. It is the high wage country. It's also for Chinese women a new destination, partially because the language is easier to acquire. This would also be true for Vietnam, Thailand, and other such places. And so what we see at the university level is that Japan is the new pull. The universities are excellent by Asian standards for sure, and even by global standards. And the standard of living is high, the society is safe. And some of the things that for a Westerner might be difficult, like the behavioral norms around the role of women and so forth, are not really worse in Japan than there are in other Asian places. So it's a much easier transition for a young person from China or Vietnam to go to Japan than it is to go to, say, Europe.
Oh, thank you for sharing. Interesting.
The other interesting point there is if the resistance is due to the fact that Japan pays lower salaries or wages to professionals than, let's say, Germany, there is a fairly well-supported economic theory, I guess, that the population decline will necessitate an influx of foreign capital, foreign money, basically, into Japan, and that the job market dynamics will necessitate a rise in salaries for skilled workers. So if, for example, that means robotics engineers and there aren't enough Japanese ones, well, they will go to wherever they are. Are they in Germany? Okay, let's go get them. Are they in America? Let's go get them too. Are they in Thailand? Go get them as well. And so the supply-demand dynamics, in theory, should necessitate fairly healthy compensation packages for the right skill sets. So I wonder if that population decline will also drive that.
I think the data show that already. There are two actually contradictory data points. The first is, as I mentioned, currently the Japanese labor force is not declining yet, partially because there are more foreigners and more women joining the workforce. So we currently do not actually see the labor shortage, but it's already felt. And certainly these developments, Eric, your data are fantastic at the beginning. I mean, these developments are not a surprise. I mean, that train has been coming for years on end, right? So nobody is surprised that this is happening. But what people are looking for now are answers. as that happens already, the large companies have launched a very strong search for talent and have violated the long-standing rules of pay by seniority or pay by tenure. So you can now, if you are a young Tokyo University graduate and you know something about, let's stick with robotics or AI or something, you will make much more than the old people in the company. And this is true and you would even make more money if we went to a startup than you might go into a large firm. The large firms are realizing this. So this is like Sony or NEC or so, and they're paying the recent graduates more than they're paying the old people. So it's already happening. You got that spot on.
That is fascinating and encouraging. As an old person, I'm encouraged by that.
Same here.
Yeah, well, I think I'm senior in this, and I completely agree with you.
So that's the whole conversation for me has been overall very encouraging, because what I've heard are evidence and reports of very intelligent adaptation and an enablement or an ability to adapt further. I do feel, I mean, beyond all of the reading I've done, I just feel from my short time in Japan that this is not a society that will be defeated by a precipitous fall in population. I mean, because one thing is, we're not talking about a population of 300. I mean, there's still going to be 97 million people on a relatively small set of islands in 2050. And even if a lot of them are older than 65, it doesn't mean that they're useless. I mean, a lot of them are going to be very useful, wise contributors to the society. So, and then you've got the whole dynamic of, basically an untapped resource of professional, educated, able women who can take on more responsibility and in many cases want to. So why not let them? And then the comfort and the ability to meld high technology into the society, that also can really take the sting out of what might be in another country a really painful drop in workforce and population.
Eric, could I just add to your data 2 more data points?
Please.
Today, Japan is the 11th largest country in the world by population, and by 2050, it will be still larger than Germany.
Ah, that's a big note. Yeah. Yeah.
And to put that in perspective, Japan is about the size of California.
Right.
Yeah. Or Texas. But it's actually closer to Texas in terms of just square feet. But yes, it is. It is the 11th largest. So this is one of these myths, right, that the Japanese like to perpetuate, which is, oh, we're this small island country. Japan is not a small country at all. It is just even though a lot of people in Japan start out with that, and we don't have any resources, and we're small, and we're this tiny little place. Well, yes, relative to China, it's very small. But in terms of the larger world view, that's actually not the case.
Great point. Great point.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Just please allow me to say that we are getting close to 9 o'clock. So 9 o'clock is the intended time of closing the room. If you have any questions, if you would like to make some, points in conclusion, please do it so now. And of course, I very much hope that we'll continue this conversation in the future, because this is a room which is open on a weekly basis every Thursday morning. So once again, please, Eric, would you like to add something, or just to, well?
Sure. I'd like to just say thank you to everyone who participated. I found this to be interesting, hopeful, and informing. And I really appreciate being invited to be one of the guests. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
It was, and thank you very much. It was very encouraging to hear a non-Japanese perspective, because when I'm in Japanese rooms, people are so pessimistic. So I am very encouraged. Thank you very much.
I wanted to say thank you to Maya, Eric, and Timothy, and all those that contributed. I was very well impressed with today's discussion and look forward to the next.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you, everyone.
No, I just want to say thank you. I was out on a long run and I was listening to you guys and I was just like, oh my goodness. I was like, this is better than music. I'm actually getting educated as I run. So thank you all for informing and confirming a lot of things.
I've felt the same way about this room, Nathan, on previous discussions. I get where you're going from.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for coming. It's so nice to have intelligent conversation. That's why I love this platform. And I always learn by listening to other people. So this has been really, really, as usual, very enjoyable for me. So thank you, everyone.
Could I ask, I was out and I wasn't looking at the phone. Who actually has the information or the monogram, I think it was mentioned?
That will be Urica. She's a professor of economics at UC San Diego.
Nice. Okay. Then that is who I will follow. Thank you.
She's a good person to follow.
Yes. And also Ulrike has a weekly podcast about Japan. Ulrike, would you like to introduce it here so that people who are interested may have a look at it?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that would be great. So it's called the Japan Zoominar
Yeah.
at UC San Diego, and it's a 1 hour every Tuesday our time. So that's 8:30 in the morning Wednesdays in Tokyo. So 4:30 Tuesdays, 4:30 p.m. in California. And I bring guests in from all kinds of walks of life. Yesterday we did Hello Kitty. Next week, and these are academic guests or guests who have done research on these topics. Next week, we'll do coffee life in Japan and looking at Japanese society through the lens of the Kisaten. That was Professor White from Boston University. And then going forward, I'll have economics, I'll have something on marketing. And so it's every week. It's actually with camera, so it's a Zoom. And you can get that information if you go to our university website. It's at jfit, J-F-I-T, jfit.ucsd.edu.
Great. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone. Great to meet you all. Great to speak to you all.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. And so we're looking forward to seeing you again here. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.